You're listening to Pelle Tenebris Radio, part of Fight the Lies Radio on the Cast 'Em Off Ministries Network. Hello and welcome to Pelle Tenebris Podcast. My name is Kelly, and again, as always, it is a pleasure to have you here with me today. I know the past couple of podcasts that I have done have been very sad and you could even say depressing in nature, so I wanted to take this opportunity to lighten the mood a little bit, and I am going to geek out about my favorite thing in the entire world: books. I love books. I love to read. I have loved to read since I learned how to read. Books have always been my escape from the world, and unfortunately from very awkward social situations, as many introverts understand. And so what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to go through a list of some of my favorite books, so if you can hang on for the next 3 hours, I'm kidding, it's not going to be that long. I'm going to try to keep this confined to half an hour if possible, an hour maximum, and you don't have to listen to it all at once if you don't want to, and if you get sick of hearing me enthuse about this, well, all you have to do is click stop. So here we go. I'm going to start with the most influential book that I have ever read, and, well, most influential next to the Bible. This is Anne of Green Gables. This was written by a lady, Lucy Maud Montgomery. This is the first book that really evoked a lot of emotions in me, and I cried, and I laughed, and I cried again, and I just thoroughly enjoyed it. This book has become so much of a favorite that I have read it 2 to 4 times a year since I was 12 years old. That was in 1992. You do the math. So I have read this book quite a lot. I'm on, I think, my 4th copy, and as I look at it, I can tell I'm going to need to get a new one soon. I believe there are 8 books in the Anne of Green Gables series. Right now, I've only got 6 of them, so I've just got 2 more, and my little collection's going to be complete. The reason I love this book series so much is that Anne Shirley, the protagonist, was a very relatable character, and I think these books are especially good for younger readers, say middle school age, even elementary age, let's say 4th grade on up to, I would say 4th grade on up through 7th grade. The books really are for anybody and everybody, but I think they're most beneficial for younger readers because, you know, kids are very imaginative and they like to play. And growing up in the 80s, I spent a lot of time outside, sometimes inside, dividing my time between playing, physical activity, and sitting on my bed and just being completely absorbed in the books that I read. So Anne Shirley is this redhead who hates her red hair, and she's an orphan. She is adopted by a couple who sent off for a little boy and instead got this little girl, and she changed their lives for the better. And I'm not going to go too much more into this because I don't want to spoil it for you, but I would highly recommend this series. And she's also relatable because Anne gets herself into scrapes, into little accidents and little goof ups, and she learns from each one. And we've all been there in that place, and we've let our imaginations run away with us. We have made assumptions about someone or something and have been proven wrong. We've been in awkward situations or awkward places. And she's just a very real, very human character, and that is the reason that this book series is my absolute favorite. If I had ever been able to have children, they definitely would have been reading those books. Now, on to another series, and I'm going to have to step out on a limb here and admit my, I don't know what the word is for this. I don't want to say fallacy, but I guess my goof here. I watched the Lord of the Rings movies before I even read the books. And I'm just going to give you a moment to collectively gasp in astonishment. Okay. So last year, I finally picked up the trilogy that I had purchased at a used bookstore and started reading. And by the Return of the King, I was weeping my way through the book and just crying and just absolutely loved so many of the characters. Now, Gandalf is always going to be my favorite. I love Gimli. I'm short too, and I would say I'm a dwarf, but the part where he sassed Éomer, I lost it. I have never laughed so stinking hard. And while I still love the movies, there's always something that's going to be lost in the translation from book to movie, and I was a little disappointed at the liberties that Peter Jackson took with including Arwen in the movies when it was other characters in the books. So she basically took their places, and this had me a little disgruntled, but I'm forgiving him for it because really the movies are very, very enjoyable. They're visually stunning and just so much fun to watch. And I have a few more of Tolkien's books. I'm trying to make my way through the Silmarillion right now, and I have the Children of Húrin and a couple of other books that I need to read. Going from Tolkien, we're going to talk about C.S. Lewis and the Chronicles of Narnia. These are books that are just outstanding, and I love them. They're perfect for readers from those in elementary school up to adults. They are full of such imagination and such wonder, and I really enjoy the, darn it, I can't find the word. I really enjoy the imagery that arises from these, and especially the Christian imagery, because both Tolkien and Lewis were Christians. But the Chronicles of Narnia, they're just, I can't say enough how fun they are to read. And I think The Magician's Nephew is probably my favorite out of the entire thing. And if you have not read the books, I'm not going to spoil it for you. I'll just say, pick them up and give them a read. And I want to give you a little bit of my input on something here. Just because books have magic in them does not automatically make them bad, and therefore, to me, they should not be banned from Christian schools or from children reading them. This is fiction, and as long as the child understands this is fiction, this is not reality, everything should be fine. I say this because the next series that I love is, of course, the Harry Potter series. And I know that there are so many Christians who have denounced these books because it's got witchcraft in it and magic and all this stuff. But when you really strip it down from all that, it is a fight between good and evil where good prevails. And who doesn't like a story like that? And yeah, they cast spells and there's an invisibility cloak and all this stuff that goes on. But again, remember, this is fiction, and Tolkien's works heavily, I think, influenced J.K. Rowling in her writing of these books. And so we can see similarities between certain characters like Dumbledore and Gandalf, or the Dementors in Harry Potter and the Nazgul in the Lord of the Rings series. So there's nothing wrong with reading Harry Potter. I want to say that right now. If you don't have any interest in reading it, that's fine. But if you are interested in reading the series, I would say, go for it. If you don't feel any conviction saying that you shouldn't do it, absolutely get the books, check them out from the library, go out and buy them all if you want to. And if you do, make sure you also get yourself a box of tissues because that's it gets very emotional. And the series is so good because, again, we have a young man here that we can sympathize with and we're rooting for. And I'm going to give you my unpopular opinion. I love Severus Snape, the end. So speaking of magic and speaking of fantasy, we're going to go on to Terry Pratchett's Discworld. Now, I don't know too many people who have read these books, and for a long time I thought I was fairly alone, but thankfully I do have a friend who loves the books too, and I've gotten two of my other friends into reading the series, and I'm very happy with myself for doing that because I cannot praise these books enough. second to Anne of Green Gables, I love Discworld. I absolutely just love all the characters. Pratchett's writing is just phenomenal. If you took Douglas Adams and Piers Anthony and put them in a blender, out would pop Terry Pratchett. He is my favorite author. Actually, I should say he was my favorite author. He passed away March 13th, 2015, and it was months before I could pick up another Discworld book and read it without just crying my eyes out. If you enjoy puns, you're going to love them. And you can see in Pratchett's books where he was also influenced by Tolkien. There's wizards, and there's witches, and there's dwarves, there's elves, there's orcs, goblins. And it's just absolutely just a trip. Now, these books were not written and published in chronological order, but if you do a Google search, you can find the order in which it's best to read all the books. But be warned, there are 40 adult books for Discworld, and there are a few books that Terry Pratchett wrote just for young readers, which I think is absolutely fantastic. And so if you want a series that is full of satire and puns and humor and just out and out lovable characters, I would really recommend this book series. And one of Sir Terry's friends, Neil Gaiman, is also an author, obviously. They co-wrote this hilarious book called Good Omens. Now, I know a lot of Christians would say, no, you need to stay away from that book. But really, this book is a parody of The Omen. And they did it so well, they wrote it so brilliantly, you cannot tell who wrote what part of this book. And there is so much humor in it. And the premise of it is that there are an angel and a demon who have gotten so used to life on earth and so comfortable in it that when the Antichrist comes, and the Antichrist is a little baby, there's a mix-up, and the baby does not go home with the people he's supposed to. He was supposed to go home with a cultural attaché and his wife, and instead he goes to this lovely couple who have a cottage. And so the angel and the demon are trying to prevent the apocalypse because they don't want the world to end. It's just an absolutely terrific read. You can read it in one day, and it's perfect for rainy days. Now, Gaiman has written several books. My favorites are The Graveyard Book, Coraline, Neverwhere, and Stardust. I am making my way through his short story series, his collection of short stories called Smoke and Mirrors, and I'm also getting ready to read American Gods and Anansi Boys. And Gaiman's ability to really draw the reader in is fantastic. It's very, very admirable. These books are just so excellent, and I absolutely I was so delighted after I finished Stardust and Neverwhere that I had to go out and get more of this man's books. I love them, and so if you like Terry Pratchett's books and you don't know about Neil Gaiman, which I highly doubt that's possible, I would suggest picking up some of Gaiman's books, and I would start with Neverwhere. Now, The Graveyard Book and Coraline might seem like they're geared more towards younger audiences, but adults can enjoy them too. A book is a book. And along with the British writer's theme, I'm going on to The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I read all 5 books in this quote-unquote trilogy within 2 weeks because I had a couple of other book series that I was reading on top of it. And afterwards, I ended up getting Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency and The Long Dark Tea Time of the Soul. I think there's one book that Douglas Adams wrote that I do not have, and I will be sure to rectify that mistake. But The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is just so blatantly a parody, and it's just so absolutely silly and ridiculous that you can't help but love it as you read it. And in true science fiction fashion, Douglas Adams makes the names of some of the planets and characters almost impossible to pronounce, and I really love that. But the whole thing is It's such a big spoof, and I highly, highly enjoyed it. So I would definitely recommend that series to you. Now we're going to get into the realm of young adult books here, and my current love interest is Throne of Glass. This book was recommended to me by a friend a couple of years ago. So I finally went out and I bought it, and I tore through it. And when I finished, I said, I need the second one. But the second one was not going to come out in paperback form for another couple of weeks, and it was coming out alongside the hardcover publication of the third book. So I waited as patiently as possible. I bought both the paperback and the hardcover, tore through those in just a couple of days, and ended up having to wait a year for the fourth book to come out. These characters in Throne of Glass are very engaging, and you're going to find yourself really rooting for the protagonist. You're going to find one of the, I suppose, side characters to be engaging and wonderful at first, and then you quickly come to almost hate this character. But, everybody has their redemption part, and it's just such action in it, and such imagination, and the names, the imagery, the covers, everything about these books is so gorgeous. The author is Sarah J. Maas, and the book series is, again, Throne of Glass. So if you like young adult and you like fantasy, there you go. I would highly recommend getting that. Now, when I was a teenager, I really got into reading more horror novels, and one of the series I loved was the Nightworld series by L.J. Smith. It's been a long time. Unfortunately, all of my copies are gone. There are 9 books in the series, and she is still, I think, currently working on the 10th. Hopefully we will get that. But these are, of course, about vampires and werewolves and shapeshifters and witches and so on and so forth. And I absolutely loved them. I devoured them when I was reading them. And along with that series, of course, if you're from the 90s, if you're a 90s baby, you're going to know who R.L. Stine is. He's the author of the Fear Street novels, which is a series, don't know how many books in the series, but he's the author of the Fear Street series for young adults, and of course Goosebumps, which was very, very popular in the mid to late 90s, and actually a movie about it just came out last year in 2015. So I haven't seen the movie yet, but I would like to. So Fear Street was another one, and these books, the Nightworld books and Fear Street, were easy reads for me, and I call them easy because I can have the whole book finished within a couple of hours. And so I think those were just about all the ones that I got into as a teenager, and I would just buy them up and devour them. I have my English classes in high school to blame for bringing me to a love of classic literature. So let's go to that genre right now. I'm going to start with one of my favorites, and it is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. Now, I've got 3 of her novels. I have Jane Eyre, Shirley, and Villette. And Jane Eyre just, oh my goodness, when I read it, I cried and cried and cried through part of it and just fell so much in love with it because the characters are, again, very engaging. They're very human, and I think that's what really draws me into a book. You can't have a perfect character. You need to have somebody who has flaws. And so these characters in in Charlotte Bronte's writings and her books are very flawed, but you can see their beauty with those flaws. They work in tandem together. In fact, their flaws are what make them beautiful. And so on the opposite, you've got these characters that you can relate to a little bit, but they might seem to be a little too perfect. And the author I'm talking about here, who has these characters, is Jane Austen. Now, Jane Austen's works were highly criticized by Charlotte Bronte. And I think part of that is because of Bronte's life. She had so much trial and tribulation in her life and so many difficulties that it turned her into a kind of cynic. And she accused Austen of writing books that were just too fluffy and of almost no substance. However, Austen's books are just very, very enjoyable. If you need something that is going to make you smile or lift your spirits, these books are perfect for you. Now, one of them, I can't say it's so much fluff. It's called Sense and Sensibility, and that will have you chewing your fingernails and swearing at one of the antagonists. And since I read this book, I cannot stand to hear the name Willoughby. I always growl it out, Willoughby. I just don't like that guy. Then you have Pride and Prejudice, which is a little fluffier. That's lighthearted. Emma is lighthearted. Northanger Abbey is lighthearted. The only one I think I had any difficult with, let me move my bear who's in front of my books. I think the one I had the most difficult time reading was Mansfield Park. And Fanny Price is the protagonist in that particular book, and she was just too much of a goody two-shoes. I just kept reading and reading. I'm like, when is this girl going to get some spice into her? When is she going to just put her foot down and lay down the law with this guy that she likes and smack him upside the head and tell him, can't you see that this other woman you're interested in is completely wrong for you? So that one I didn't like very much. If you really enjoy Pride and Prejudice like I do, P.D. James wrote a kind of sequel to it called Death Comes to Pemberley. And I was just loving that everything in this book was true to Austen's writing, as true as it could be. And it was nice to have a mix of Austen with some, mystery and suspense. So that I found highly enjoyable. So we're going to go on with the classic theme, and we're going to go to some kind of standalone books. A couple of weeks ago, I finished reading Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and man, I cried at the end. If you've read the book, you know what I'm talking about, and none of the movies have ever done this book justice, and I would like to see that done. I would like to see someone make a very accurate movie adaptation of Frankenstein, because this book is just wonderful. The language is gorgeous, and it really deserves a movie that is going to be true to everything that is in there. Now, I know that those of us, us bookworms, we almost demand perfect accuracy in every movie adaptation. Unfortunately, that means sitting through a movie that is hours and hours long, which we wouldn't mind doing. We can just sit there and critique it and, scowl whenever there's even something slightly off. But for moviegoers, they're not going to want to sit there that long. So we have to make do with what we have. But if somebody ever makes an adaptation of Frankenstein that is as true to the story as can be, I will be happy. We have Anna Karenina. Now, this book is a 3-course meal in itself. It is very, very big. I think it's around 1,000-ish pages long. But the first time I saw it, I was at a library, and, this looks interesting. Let me read the back of it. Okay, I'll take it home. I had read it in just a few days because, like I said, it's a lot of book, and plus I was working, and so it's kind of hard to, finish a book and keep reading when you have to get up and go to work. But by the end of it, man, I was just head over heels for this, and I loved it. And I really like the most recent adaptation of Anna Karenina. I think there's only 2. There's one from 1948 with Vivien Leigh in it. And I tried watching that adaptation, but within the first couple of minutes, man, this is too inaccurate. I ain't having nothing to do with this. So I finally watched the 2012 adaptation, and it kept the core plot of the story without having to overindulge in all the details, and there are a lot of details in Anna Karenina. So having that core plot, that heart of the story, it was done so well. I was impressed. I was so very impressed, and I thought, okay, they did great on this. And I almost never say that about any book adaptation ever. So going on, we have, Dracula. I would say that's almost a must read for goths. I love Dracula. It is almost difficult for me to describe how beautifully written this book is. And I know I've kept on saying that, but that's what captures me, but that's what has captured my attention and my love for these books, is that the language used is just so descriptive, and it flows so well that I can't help but love it. And Dracula is one of those villains that you just love. And I'm not going to say love to hate, because you don't love him, but you love him, you understand where he's coming from, but at the same time you hate his actions. And the fact that there is redemption in this book really, really makes my heart just swell with joy. I'm going to give you one last, we're going to do that. I'm going to give you one last classic novel that I love, and that is The Count of Monte Cristo. I love a good story about revenge, and this is everything that I could ever want. This book, again, is just so well written. Alexander Dumas he was talented. I think he was possibly before his time. He was great. I also have Queen Margot and The Man in the Iron Mask, and I have an old 1950s copy of The Three Musketeers, which I scored at a charity book sale, and I was over the moon about that. But The Count of Monte Cristo is just, the way the tale is woven is very, very impressive. And the story of how the protagonist just almost, he achieves his ends, but he doesn't continue going on down that path. He achieves his end, yet he almost seems reluctant to do so. And if I'm incorrect in that, please do correct me, because it's been a little while since I've read the book, so I need to get back and reread it. And that's what I've done with all these books. Just go back and reread them as I read other books as well. So we're going to go back to the realm of horror, but instead of young adult, this is going to be adult fiction. And I'm going to start with some Stephen King. That man knows how to send chills down your spine. He knows how to make you reluctant to get up in the middle of the night in your dark bedroom and go to the bathroom. He is the one, I think, who has taught us all to hold our bladders until the daybreak. The first book of his that I read was Carrie. I cried. I felt a connection with Carrie, because having come from an abusive home where my mother was very religious and very perfectionist, I latched onto this character immediately. And with this, I actually watched the movie before I read the book, but when I read the book, I thought, man, that movie's got nothing on this. And Carrie remains one of my favorite movies to this day, and I'm probably going to do that. I'm definitely going to do a podcast giving you all of my favorite movies, and most of them are going to be horror movies, but don't worry, they're all good, I promise. So I read Carrie, and I loved it, and I cried at the end again, yes. And I hadn't read any of his, that was the only book of his that I had read for a long time, and I have since been getting more and more. I'm in the middle of Pet Sematary, and let me tell you, that sends shivers down my spine. It makes the hair rise on the back of my neck, and I am loving it. If I could write like that, man, I'd be happy. We're going on to Anne Rice and her Vampire Chronicles. Oh my goodness. Lestat is probably the one character that I wish I could be like. This guy is just... he is the brat prince. He is fantastic. He is impulsive. He has a bit of a temper. He is just the perfect vampire protagonist. And so I read Interview with the Vampire after I had seen the movie. Promise, this is all. And I loved the book. And what I had done was that I went to my local library and I checked it out. Then I went back and I checked out The Vampire Lestat. And then I went back and I checked out Queen of the Damned. And Not long after I had finished reading Queen of the Damned, the movie came out. I don't know who thought it was a good idea for this to be an MTV movie, and I do not know who thought it was a good idea to hire the script writer, the director, the producer, the actors, everybody, but that movie was such a big disappointment. I almost walked out in the middle of the theater. I thought, what is this? This isn't the movie. Or excuse me, what is this? This isn't the book. What is this stuff you made me see with my own eyes? How dare you? And I have tried to eradicate all memory of that movie from my brain. And unfortunately, on occasion, I find myself wanting to watch it. I'm just like, remember how terrible it was? And I step back. So a couple of years ago, Anne Rice published a book called Prince Lestat. I loved it. Oh man, I loved it. And I was like, oh, okay, my brat prince is back. I am so excited about this, and just completely devoured it. I had actually pre-ordered it, and it arrived a couple of days after it came out, and I read that right after I had read the 2 Throne of Glass books. I am incorrigible when it comes to reading. I have been devouring everything that I possibly can, because to me, you cannot have enough reading material. And so I'm making my way through all of Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles, and I've got to say I'm loving everything so far, except for Blackwood Farm. It's not bad, it just made me go a little bit in one too many places, and sometimes when there's a character who uses a word more times than I think necessary, I get really aggravated, and I'm like, you overuse that word. I start feeling like Inigo Montoya, you keep saying that word. I do not think it means what you think it means. So on to enough of that. But I've been enjoying reading these. And so on to the master of horror, the master of fiction, the great, the mighty Edgar Allan Poe. I think it's also almost a staple of being a goth to love Edgar Allan Poe. Joking and saying I think it might be one of the 10 goth commandments. I have loved him ever since I started reading his works as a small child, and I know my mom wasn't exactly too happy because there's all this macabre stuff, but Edgar Allan Poe was a genius, and many people focus on his more macabre stories, but honestly, if you read stories like The Gold Bug or The Curious Case of Monsieur Valdemar or Murders in the Rue Morgue, those aren't really macabre. Now, the ones that are, of course, his poem, The Raven, there's The Pit and the Pendulum, and my absolute favorite, The Cask of Amontillado. Those are more macabre, but stories like The Gold Bug, you see his genius in these writings, and I can't say enough how much I love Poe. I have the complete Tales and Poems of Edgar Allan Poe. I have a graphic comic novel called The Poe Murders. It's terrific. I highly, highly, highly recommend you look that up. I have a black mug that I got at the Edgar Allan Poe Museum in Richmond, Virginia, which thankfully is only about an hour and a half from where I live. And I have an Edgar Allan Poe t-shirt. I have a Fortunato mask. I put in an order from Nightmare Jewelry in the UK, and you can find her on Facebook. She makes fantastic jewelry. But I have this loaded up charm bracelet with a tile in it, and on that tile are the first 2 lines of Poe's poem Alone. From childhood's hour, I have not been as others were, I have not seen as others saw. That poem when I first read it, that poem struck such a chord in me, and I tore through the rest of it, and I had memorized it, and I carry it with me, so to speak. It's my favorite of all his poems. You would think it was The Raven, but it was not. It was Alone. And in a nonfiction horror realm, I have a few books like Ghosts of New England, Ghostly Scotland, The Big Book of Virginia Ghost Stories. I'm really interested in reading books like that because they have history in them, And also, they've got some stories that'll just, make you not want to go to sleep and will definitely make you check under your bed 4 or 5, 10 times in a night. They are so good. And coming from the Appalachians of Virginia, I know that area has a history. The people are very, very superstitious there. And so a lot of these tales that you might hear have been handed down from generation to generation to generation in Virginia, in the Appalachian Mountains, and not just the ones in Virginia, but the one in, of course, in West Virginia and so forth. But these books are almost part of my childhood, really, because I used to love scary things. And here's the thing, when I watch horror movies, I really prefer for ones that have the monster that you can't see, but it's in there, and it builds up so much tension and suspense. If you throw in a few very well-timed jump scares, man, I'm gonna love it. And I don't want to always see the monster's face. I just want to know that it's there, because that's what gets me creeped out. And that's partly why I like the Five Nights at Freddy's games so much, because they have jump scares, and it's always fun to do that. So this is about as adventurous as I get reading these books and watching these horror movies. I think I've pretty much, no, I have not covered it. We are going to go to one last person, the man who was the role model of my childhood, James Herriot. If you know who James Herriot is, and if you don't know who he is, well, I'm going to tell you. James Herriot was this English veterinarian. He was a country veterinarian, and he had written down all of his experiences, and of course they were turned into books. Now, some of these, possibly most, are a little embellished, but they are just so wonderful and so precious. And I've been an animal lover since I could walk. And I really wanted for so long to be a veterinarian, but unfortunately that did not work out for me, and that's okay. But this man was absolutely my hero. My grandfather had his books, and if Peepaw came down into his library and he saw that one of his James Herriot books was missing, he knew I did it. I love those books. They are so heartwarming, and they are so funny. You will laugh so hard, tears will come to your eyes, and you're going to get a workout. So let's see, I think I've pretty much covered all of my favorites. I have so many more books. I have almost 600 books. I am addicted, and honestly, frankly, I don't care that I am. But I hope this was lighthearted enough for you, and I hope, that you've heard of some authors and some book series that you hadn't heard before, and, feel free to just, go on out to the library or go on to the bookstore. If you go to the bookstore, spend responsibly. But read these books, and I say that reading is extremely important because it exercises your brain, and it actually does help create empathy and help that grow too, because if you find you're really absorbed in this book and these characters are in a sticky situation and your heart's racing and you're so worried about them, that's a good thing. It helps you become more empathetic and sympathetic towards people, and it expands your vocabulary. And especially if you read the classics, and especially if you read my beloved William Shakespeare, you're going to look up the meaning of these words, and it's good to have an expanded vocabulary, because sometimes if you're kind of limited in it, you can't find the words to express how you're really feeling. And so having an extensive vocabulary and learning new words is, to me at least, is always a good thing. I'm a word nerd. I am very, very highly picky of grammar and in writing. And so if I can't read a book that has poor grammar in it, or just, the plot's good, the idea is good, but the writing stinks. And so I hope you found this informative, and I hope you found it enjoyable. It is the day before my wrist surgery, and so I'm trying to haul out these different podcasts so you guys can have something from me. I'm hoping to do 1 or 2 more. But if you can, if you're hearing this on April 27th, which you're probably not, just keep me in prayer for a good recovery, because I am extremely stubborn when it comes to being out of commission. I do not like sitting down, and I do not like being not able to do stuff. So if you could just pray for a good recovery for me. Again, I hope you guys found this enjoyable and informative, and until next time, thank you for hanging out with me. Pelle Tenebris Radio is a production of Fight the Lies Ministries. Visit us at ftlradio.net. This program is released under Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License. Intro and outro music by Kevin MacLeod at incompetech.com.